Welcome to Encounter Wargaming. Today we're going to continue our discussion on gods. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the Aeldari gods. We're going to take a journey through the Aeldari myth cycle and talk about its effect on the development of the 40k galaxy. As usual, I'm Jay, and this is Warhammer 40k Metaphysics 101. In the past few videos, we've covered the definition of what a god is, as well as how they're created. We also touched on the star gods in the last video, and how they are not gods, in the true sense. The Aeldari gods, on the other hand, are in fact real gods, in the same way that the Chaos gods are. The Aeldari have a rather large pantheon in comparison to other races in Warhammer 40k. The best place for us to start for this video is probably at the beginning. We're going to start at the creation of the Aeldari race, right up to the fall of the Aeldari, and where this leaves them in the 41st millennium. The creation of the Aeldari. The Aeldari mythology teaches that they are children of Isha, the mother goddess of fertility and the harvest, and Kurnos, god of the hunt. In these early days, it is said that the gods walked among them, teaching them and leading them in a long-forgotten age of prosperity. We know as 40k fans that it was the Old Ones that created the Aeldari to aid them in the war against the Necron Tyr and their Catan masters. Now this is where it gets fuzzy right off the bat. This war is known as the War in Heaven. As we progress through the Aeldari myth cycle, we'll encounter another war by the same name. You would think a super intelligent and technologically advanced race such as the Aeldari could come up with a better name, but I guess not. This has led to a lot of confusion for us fans. Hopefully by the end of this video the confusion will be at a minimum. At least that's what I'm aiming for. Anyway, the fact that they say they were created by Isha and Kurnos makes me wonder if they were in fact referring to the Old Ones that created them. Especially since they say they walked among them. Whereas now the Old Ones are no longer around, so they would no longer be walking among them. We know after covering the creation of Slaanesh in past content, though, that races create gods, not the other way around. So perhaps this is purely mythology, since Isha is one of the only Aeldari gods to survive into the current 40k timeline, but we'll talk about that in later videos. Therefore, she is in fact a true god, and not one of the Old Ones, in my opinion, unless somehow the Old Ones became gods, but that sounds like a whole different video on its own. Isha's Tears. Lilith was the Aeldari goddess of dreams. She's the patron goddess of seers and was known amongst the gods for her prophetic visions. She was able to see the future better than any of the other deities, and her visions always came true. She had a vision of Cain, the god of war, who would be destroyed by the Aeldari people. Since her visions always came true, Cain swore to destroy the Aeldari race and never let them destroy him. The genocide that ensued was so horrible that Isha, the mother of the Aeldari and goddess of life, cried and cried and cried. She went to the god Azuryan, the Phoenix King, and leader of the Aeldari pantheon, begging him to stop Cain from the murder of her children. Azuryan complied and created a partition between the Aeldari gods and the Aeldari. This was when the gods stopped walking among the Aeldari. In fact, this made it so that none of the gods could even interact with the Aeldari at all. This successfully prevented Cain from slaying any more Aeldari. It also separated Isha from her children, which made her and her consort Kurnos very, very unhappy. They wanted to be with their children, not separated from them. The couple approached Vol, the god of the forge. With his help, they worked together to create the Spirit Stones. These crystal devices were used to allow the gods to communicate with the Aeldari people. Through the stones, Isha and Kurnos were able to continue to guide the Aeldari in secret. As we know, currently in 40k, the Spirit Stones are used by the Aeldari to return their souls to the Infinity Circuit of the Craft Worlds, but obviously this is what their original purpose was. Anyway, back to our story. The vengeful Cain witnessed this firsthand. The separation between the Aeldari and the gods was their doing, in order to prevent him from saving his future self. How is it that they can have Azrian institute such a law, and then immediately go behind his back and directly disobey said law? Cain, of course, took this information to Azrian, and asked that they be punished. Azrian, of course, felt sympathy for the couple, and understood that they only loved their children, but the law is the law, and no exceptions can be made, especially when they asked for that law to be put in place in the first place. Since Cain had been the one who was hampered most by the law in the first place, Azrian ruled that Cain should decide the punishment of Isha and Kurnos. Cain, being a god of war, began to torture them in every manner he knew how. This, of course, upset many of the other gods, which leads us to the next chapter in Aeldari mythology. The War in Heaven. Though many of the Aeldari gods were upset about the torture of Isha and Kurnos, there was only one who was truly outspoken about it: their good friend Vol. Vol eventually approached Cain about the situation, and in the interest of freeing his friends, he made a deal with the god of war. Vol was a master smith. A single blade fashioned by the Lord of Forges in the hands of a mortal could stand up to thousands carrying mundane weapons. Cain knew this and agreed that Vol would forge him 100 blades in 1 year's time. Vol rejoiced at this opportunity to free his friends, and of course set to work immediately. Once the year was up, Vol had only made 99 blades, which would have rendered the deal void, of course. So in an attempt to fool the god of war, Vol put one mortal blade in with the others, hoping that Cain wouldn't notice. It was a risk he was willing to take in order to free his friends from the horrible torture that they had endured. Cain was ecstatic to see the craftsmanship that went into these blades, and of course released the god and goddess immediately upon receiving the weapons. It didn't take long, however, for Cain to discover the mundane blade amongst the others, but luckily Isha and Kurnos were long gone by then. In a fit of rage, Cain accused Vol of being a cheat and a liar. He immediately set out to get revenge against Vol for his trickery. The wars that followed would divide the gods against one another and would lead to what the Aeldari refer to now as the War in Heaven. This is not to be confused with the War in Heaven fought between the Old Ones and the Catan, although there are versions that could be confused as such. Many sources claim they are in fact two separate times in Aeldari history, but there are those versions where the Aeldari went to war with the Necrons, using the 100 swords of Vol while fighting for Cain, which resulted in the Aeldari losing because of that one mortal blade. This would make sense when looking back at Aeldari history, knowing that they were created as a warrior race by the Old Ones in order to defeat the Necrons and their Catan masters, thus further leading to the theory that the Aeldari gods might have actually been Old Ones after all. The truth is, we'll likely never know the facts, since what we're talking about literally happened millions of years before the current 40k timeline, and therefore the truth of the matter is of course shrouded in mythology at this point. Anaris, the Dawnlight. In the final attempt to defeat Cain, Vol decided to finish the final sword that he had failed to finish before. He made it the greatest of all the swords he had ever forged, greater than any of the 99 he gave Cain. Its name was Anaris, the Dawnlight. With this blade in hand, Vol went to do battle with Cain in order to end his tyranny once and for all. An epic battle ensued. Vol fought valiantly, but even with a magnificent blade, he was no match for the god of war. Cain crippled Vol and imprisoned him by chaining him onto his own anvil. The consort of Azarian, named Falcu, the Falcon, the deity the Eldar would later name their anti-grav tanks after, took Anaris and gave it to Eldinesh, the greatest of the Aeldari heroes. Eldinesh sought revenge against the god of war for causing so much trouble for the other gods and his mortal kin, of course, and sought to slay the troublesome deity once and for all. With Anaris in hand, Eldinesh came for Cain. For mortal, Eldinesh fought incredibly well, but not well enough. Sadly, even with the greatest of all the blades in his hand, he was still a mere mortal. Cain crushed Eldinesh into a pulp. Once Cain had defeated the great hero, though, his hands began to drip with blood, as they would for all eternity. He would from that point on be known as Cain, the bloody-handed one. It was at this time that Azarian stepped in. He had seen enough slaughter and many of his fellow gods crippled by Cain's vengeance. He ruled that the war was over and that Cain stopped the madness that his anger had unleashed. Cain was happy to call his vengeance satisfied and basically just walked away, but forever changed. The Fall. We covered the creation of Slaanesh in a previous video as an example of how a god is born. We covered the metaphysical aspects of the Aeldari's lust and decadence coalescing in the immaterium in order to create a god of those exact aspects. Since today we are covering the myth cycles of the Aeldari, it's only fitting that we cover that cataclysmic event from the perspective of the Aeldari gods. The creation of Slaanesh not only put a physical mark on the galaxy in the form of the Eye of Terror, and nearly rendered the entire Aeldari race extinct, but it obviously also had a massive impact on the Aeldari gods and the Aeldari mythology. We've already gone into detail of how Slaanesh was created. If you want more details on that, you should jump back in the playlist and check out that video. But right now, we're just going to continue on from there, since the creation of Slaanesh heralded the destruction of the once galaxy-spanning Aeldari Empire. It also naturally marked the death of the Aeldari Pantheon, with very few exceptions. Long story short, when Slaanesh was born, he basically slew all of the Aeldari gods. Lilith, Azarian, Morai Hag, many, many more. Because of this, the war god Cain took up his sword and took Slaanesh on in combat, trying to defend his fallen brothers. Even though he was the mightiest warrior of all of the Aeldari gods, his might was no match for the newborn prince. Slaanesh shattered the bloody-handed god and scattered his pieces throughout the galaxy. Luckily, these shards settled within the infinity circuits of the Aeldari craft worlds. And so it came to pass that Lilith's prophecy was accurate. If you remember at the beginning of this video, I mentioned how she predicted that the Aeldari race would destroy Cain. In their ignorance, the Aeldari had created the downfall of their race and most of their pantheon by creating Slaanesh, who inevitably shattered Cain. These shards are now the avatars of Cain that the Aeldari call upon to aid them in battle. It is said that Slaanesh took Isha as his own instead of killing her. Why he did this, I guess we'll never really know. But what we do know is that Nurgle heard her cries and freed her from the Prince of Pleasure. Now she resides in Nurgle's cauldron chamber. He basically uses her as a guinea pig for testing his latest and greatest diseases. Since she is the goddess of life and healing, she is the perfect candidate for testing the strength of his concoctions. He inflicts her with his latest diseases and see how long it takes her to heal from it. This allows the Plague Lord to judge the strength of his creations. A horrible fate indeed, but I suppose it's better than absolute annihilation, but I guess that's a matter of opinion. The only other Aeldari god left behind, basically, that we haven't talked about at all in this video is Sigorak, the god of the Harlequins, the laughing god. Aside from Isha, who clearly has survived as Nurgle's consort, and Cain, I suppose, has been shattered, which I don't know if that counts as dead or not, but he definitely lives on, I suppose, in the avatars of Cain. Other than that, the only other Eldar god, at least I know of, that has survived is Sigorak, or Chegorak. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that properly, but we'll go with Chegorak for now. They say he's the only being in the entire galaxy that knows the entire webway inside and out, all of its little nooks and crannies and passages and etc., etc., which is now the home of the Harlequins. So it's fitting that he is the god of the Harlequins. And so it's said that he used the conflict between Cain and Slaanesh as a chance to basically slip away before Slaanesh could kill him too. And he disappeared, of course, into the webway, where, again, like I said, the Harlequins and, I guess, technically, the Drukhari currently reside. Slaanesh basically marked the end of the Aeldari pantheon, and that's pretty much as far as we can go right now. Now, they have forwarded the fluff in Warhammer 40k, and so Ennead is sort of being brought into the fold, I suppose, because the Aeldari are slowly generating Ennead, I suppose, in their desire to defeat Slaanesh, because basically she is a god that is being constructed, as far as I can tell, simply for the purpose of slaying Slaanesh and freeing the Aeldari people from having their souls swallowed after death. So we'll get into Ennead in its own video. I think that's worth mentioning because even though we talked about Slaanesh and how and the creation of Slaanesh, and so we understand the creation of a god, I think it would be good to understand the creation of Ennead a little further. In fact, I'd like to do some further investigation, so look out for that in the future. Other than that, that's basically all we have time for today. Next time we'll cover the concept of shards, since we've discussed that, both of the Catan shards, and of course now we've talked about the avatars of Cain in more detail. I want to cover this concept in more detail and its metaphysical implications, so stay tuned for that, of course coming up soon. That being said, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any future content. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends if you're so inclined. Make sure to comment below as well. I want to hear your thoughts on the Aeldari mythology, the Aeldari gods. I'd also like to get into a discussion about shards before we actually get to that video. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Finally, if you want to support and counter Wargaming, make sure to scroll down to the description below and check out our Patreon campaign. For $1 a video, or even $1 a month, you get a whole bunch of extra perks, and they're all listed on the page. So check that out in the description below. Also, if a monthly subscription isn't your thing, you can check out our Spreadshirt page, also in the description below, and pick yourself up some swag and help us out with a couple bucks. So anyway, that's all from me for now, and we'll see you at our next encounter.
Like a monkey in a rocket.